The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Sheridan's imposing gates, where two worlds were about to collide in a moment that would echo through military history. Behind those gates, the President of the United States waited for a soldier whose courage had just prevented an international crisis. But at the checkpoint, a woman in desert camouflage faced the kind of doubt she'd encountered her entire career. Doubt that would soon transform into awe when the most powerful man in the world stepped forward to honor her sacrifice. If true stories of quiet courage and long overdue recognition move you, then hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're watching from. This story will stay with you. The Illinois morning was crisp, with autumn leaves dancing across the asphalt as Captain Olivia Cruz approached Fort Sheridan's main gate. Her desert combat uniform bore the subtle marks of a long journey, wrinkled from travel, dusty from operations thousands of miles away. She carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from surviving situations where hesitation meant death, but exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. 48 hours ago, she had been in a classified location halfway around the world, executing a mission that would never appear in any public record. The guards at the checkpoint looked up from their morning routine as she approached. Sergeant First Class Mike Reynolds, a 20-year veteran with graying temples, squinted at her through the armored glass of the security booth. His partner, Corporal Jessica Martinez, was newer to the post, but carried herself with the rigid posture of someone determined to prove her worth. "Morning," Olivia said, presenting her military identification card and orders through the slot. "Captain Olivia Cruz, reporting for briefing with the Joint Chiefs." Reynolds took her ID, his weathered fingers turning it over slowly. He glanced up at her, then back at the card, his expression skeptical. "This says Special Operations Command. You're not on today's access list, Captain." "My mission parameters changed," Olivia replied evenly, her voice carrying the controlled calm she'd learned in the most dangerous corners of the world. "I was redirected here directly from the field. If you call Colonel Morrison's office." "Ma'am," Martinez interrupted, stepping closer to the window, "we've had issues with people trying to gain unauthorized access lately. Your uniform, it doesn't look regulation for this base." Olivia felt the familiar knot form in her stomach. The same feeling she'd experienced countless times throughout her military career when her competence was questioned before her character was known. She looked down at her desert camouflage, still bearing the faint smell of foreign dust and the microscopic evidence of a mission that had pushed her to her absolute limits. "Understand your caution," she said, maintaining her professional tone despite the frustration building inside her. "But I need to stress the urgency of this meeting. Lives may depend on the intelligence I'm carrying." Reynolds exchanged a glance with Martinez. In their experience, most people who made dramatic claims about urgency were either lying or confused about their own importance. The base hosted hundreds of meetings every week, and they'd learned to be skeptical of anyone who claimed their business was more critical than anyone else's. "Captain, I'm going to need you to step aside while we verify your credentials," Reynolds said, his tone suggesting this was a routine inconvenience rather than a matter of national importance. "There's a waiting area over there. This might take a while." The waiting area was a small concrete pad beside the guardhouse, exposed to the wind and curious stares of other personnel entering the base. Olivia watched as civilian contractors, junior officers, and visiting officials all passed through the checkpoint with routine efficiency while she remained stranded in bureaucratic limbo. She pulled out her encrypted satellite phone, one of the few pieces of equipment that connected her to the classified world she'd just left. But as she started to dial, Martinez approached with a suspicious look. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to put that device away. No unauthorized communications equipment near the checkpoint." "This is military issued," Olivia protested, showing the device's markings. "Not for this base, it isn't," Martinez replied firmly. "Standard security protocol." As Olivia reluctantly pocketed the phone, she noticed other personnel beginning to stare. A group of junior officers whispered among themselves, their expressions ranging from curious to dismissive. She caught fragments of their conversation carried on the wind. "Doesn't look like she belongs here. Probably some contractor trying to..." The sun climbed higher, and what should have been a routine entry turned into a public spectacle. Olivia remained standing, her military bearing intact despite the growing embarrassment of the situation. She had faced enemy fire, navigated political minefields in foreign countries, and earned the respect of some of the most elite soldiers in the world. Yet here, at an American military base, she found herself reduced to a person of questionable credibility waiting for bureaucrats to validate her existence. While she waited, Olivia's mind drifted back to the journey that had brought her to this moment. Growing up in San Antonio, Texas, she had been raised by her grandmother, Rosa Cruz, after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. Rosa had immigrated from Mexico as a young woman, working multiple jobs to build a life in America, and she instilled in Olivia the belief that in America, determination could overcome any obstacle. Mija, Rosa would say while working on her sewing in their small apartment, "This country gives you chances, but you have to be twice as good to get half as much. That's not fair, but it's true. So you be 3 times as good, and you take what's yours." Olivia had taken those words to heart, excelling in school and athletics despite the financial struggles that marked her teenage years. When she announced her intention to join the military, Rosa had been worried but proud. "The uniform will protect you," she had said, "but only if you honor it first." The path to becoming the first woman to complete the Army's most elite selection course had been paved with obstacles that went far beyond physical challenges. During the 18-month selection process, she had endured not just the brutal physical demands, sleep deprivation, extreme weather conditions, psychological pressure, but also the subtle and not-so-subtle suggestions that she didn't belong. "Cruz, you sure you wouldn't be more comfortable in a support role?" Her first instructor, Master Sergeant Kelly, had asked during week 3, after she'd successfully completed a 40-mile navigation exercise that eliminated half the male candidates. She had looked him straight in the eye and replied, "Sergeant, I'm comfortable wherever the mission requires me to be." That had become her standard response to doubt. Not defiance, but quiet professionalism. She let her performance speak louder than any argument she could make. By the end of the course, even the most skeptical instructors had to acknowledge that she hadn't just met the standards, she had exceeded them. But success in selection was only the beginning. Her first operational deployment had been to a country she couldn't name, working with local forces to gather intelligence on terrorist networks. The cultural challenges were immense. Many of their foreign partners had never worked with women in combat roles, and gaining their trust required patience and tactical brilliance. She remembered the night when everything changed. Her team had been pinned down by enemy fire in an urban environment, cut off from support and facing overwhelming odds. The local commander, who had initially refused to take orders from a woman, watched as she coordinated a complex extraction that saved 12 lives, including his own. Afterward, he had approached her with tears in his eyes. "Captain," he had said in broken English, "I was wrong about you. You fight like a warrior." That mission led to others, each more complex and dangerous than the last. She became known for her ability to build relationships with local populations, gather intelligence that others couldn't access, and execute operations with surgical precision. Her reputation grew within the special operations community, even as she remained largely unknown to the outside world. The mission that had brought her to Fort Sheridan today was the culmination of 3 years of careful relationship building and intelligence gathering. A terrorist network had been planning an attack on American soil, using resources and contacts that traditional intelligence couldn't penetrate. Olivia had spent 6 months embedded with local sources, slowly gaining the trust necessary to access the network's inner circle. The intelligence she had gathered, names, locations, timing, methodology, had been transmitted to Washington 48 hours ago, leading to coordinated raids that prevented what could have been the deadliest terrorist attack since 9/11. But the mission had required her to burn her cover, making her extraction both urgent and dangerous. She had spent 36 hours moving through hostile territory to reach the extraction point, finally boarding a military transport with nothing but the clothes on her back and the encrypted drive containing additional intelligence that could prevent future attacks. Now, standing in the autumn sun at Fort Sheridan, she found herself facing a different kind of challenge, one that felt both familiar and frustrating. The guards weren't questioning her competence. They were questioning her very right to be there. As the morning progressed, the situation at the checkpoint began to attract more attention. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the base's deputy commander, noticed the commotion from her office window overlooking the main gate. A 25-year veteran with silver hair and sharp eyes, Mitchell had worked her way up through a military that hadn't always welcomed women in leadership roles. "What's the situation in the front gate?" she asked her aide, Major Thompson. "Some captain claiming she has urgent business with the Joint Chiefs," Thompson replied, consulting his tablet. "Guards are having trouble verifying her credentials. She's not on any of our access lists." Mitchell frowned. In her experience, legitimate emergencies were usually accompanied by proper notification through channels. But something about the situation nagged at her. She had learned to trust her instincts, and they were telling her this might be more than a routine security issue. "I'll take a look," she decided, grabbing her cap from the desk. Meanwhile, at the checkpoint, Olivia found herself the center of growing speculation. Word had spread through the base's informal communication network, the kind of gossip that moved faster than official channels. A small crowd of personnel had found reasons to pass by the main gate, curious about the woman who claimed to have urgent business but couldn't get past the guards. "I heard she's claiming to be special operations," one lieutenant whispered to another. "In that uniform? She looks like she's been sleeping in the desert," came the reply. Olivia heard the comments, but maintained her composure. She had learned long ago that responding to every slight would exhaust her energy for the battles that truly mattered. Instead, she focused on the mission, getting the additional intelligence to the people who could act on it. When Colonel Mitchell arrived at the checkpoint, she found a tense standoff. The guards were following protocol, but she could see the frustration building on all sides. She approached Olivia directly, her experienced eyes taking in details that the younger guards had missed. The specific way Olivia carried herself, the subtle indicators of someone who had recently been in a combat environment, the quality of equipment visible on her belt. "Captain Cruz," Mitchell asked, extending her hand. "I'm Colonel Mitchell, Deputy Base Commander. I understand there's some confusion about your visit today." "Ma'am," Olivia replied, accepting the handshake with relief. "I'm carrying time-sensitive intelligence related to Operation Clearwater. I was diverted here directly from the field for immediate debriefing." Mitchell's expression changed subtly. Operation Clearwater wasn't a name that appeared on routine briefing schedules, but she had heard whispers about increased activity in certain classified channels. The fact that this captain knew the operation name suggested she was exactly who she claimed to be. "Your identification and orders, please," Mitchell requested formally. As Olivia handed over her documents, Mitchell noticed details that the checkpoint guards had missed. The ID card bore security features that were only used for personnel with the highest level clearances. The orders, while brief, contained authentication codes that Mitchell recognized as legitimate. But before she could fully process the documents, her aide hurried over with an urgent expression. "Colonel, I've just received word that we're expecting a high-priority visitor today." "Very high priority. The briefing schedule has been completely cleared." Mitchell understood immediately. High priority, in this context, meant someone from the executive level of government. Combined with this captain's claims and credentials, the pieces began forming a picture that made her pulse quicken. "Captain Cruz," she said, returning the documents, "I believe there may have been a miscommunication about your arrival. Let me personally escort you to the briefing facility." The change in tone was immediate and dramatic. The guards who had been questioning Olivia's very right to be on the base suddenly snapped to attention. The growing crowd of curious onlookers began to disperse, sensing that they were witnessing something beyond their clearance level. But as they prepared to enter the base, a black convoy of vehicles approached from the opposite direction. The lead vehicle bore flags that made Colonel Mitchell's eyes widen. This wasn't just any high-priority visitor. This was the highest priority possible. The convoy came to a stop at the secure entrance adjacent to the main checkpoint, and Olivia found herself in an unprecedented situation. She was standing between two worlds, the public area where her credentials had been questioned, and the secure zone where the most powerful people in the country conducted their most sensitive business. Secret Service agents emerged from the vehicles with practiced efficiency, their eyes scanning the area with professional paranoia. They noticed Olivia immediately, a figure who didn't quite fit the typical profile of base personnel, standing with a colonel, but clearly not part of the planned reception. "Ma'am, I need you to step back," Agent Sarah Chun instructed Olivia, her hand moving subtly toward her weapon. "She's with me," Colonel Mitchell interjected quickly. "Captain Cruz is here for the briefing." Agent Chun spoke quietly into her radio, receiving instructions that made her frown. The original security briefing hadn't mentioned a captain being part of today's meetings, and unexpected changes to presidential schedules were treated with extreme suspicion. As this tension played out, more personnel gathered at a respectful distance. Word had spread through the base that something extraordinary was happening. Junior officers found excuses to be in the area, while senior staff watched from office windows. The guards at the checkpoint, Reynolds and Martinez, realized they might have been involved in something far more significant than a routine credentialing issue. President James Harrison emerged from the lead vehicle, his presence immediately commanding the attention of everyone in the vicinity. A former Navy officer himself, Harrison carried himself with the bearing of someone comfortable in military environments. His security detail formed a protective perimeter, but he paused when he noticed the unusual situation at the checkpoint. "Mr. President," Colonel Mitchell approached with a salute. "This is Captain Olivia Cruz, who has been waiting to brief you on Operation Clearwater." Harrison's expression changed immediately. He had been briefed on the broad outlines of the operation during his flight to Fort Sheridan, but he knew that the real details, the intelligence that had prevented a catastrophic attack on American soil, were carried by a single operative who had risked everything to gather it. He looked at Olivia, taking in her appearance with the eye of someone who understood what field operations demanded. Her uniform might not have met parade standards, but it told the story of someone who had been in harm's way for her country. The exhaustion in her eyes spoke of sacrifices that went beyond physical discomfort. "Captain Cruz," the president said, his voice carrying clearly across the now-silent checkpoint area, "I understand you've had quite a journey to get here." "Yes, sir," Olivia replied, maintaining her military bearing despite the surreal nature of the situation. What happened next would be remembered by everyone present for the rest of their lives. President Harrison, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Armed Forces, took a step forward and rendered a slow, deliberate salute to Captain Olivia Cruz. "Did you expect that?" The President of the United States, stepping forward to salute a soldier no one wanted to let through the gate? If that moment hit you like it hit us, share this video with someone who needs to see what true recognition looks like. The gesture was unprecedented. While presidents typically receive salutes rather than give them, Harrison's action sent a clear message about the nature of Olivia's service and sacrifice. The assembled personnel, from the guards who had questioned her credentials to the senior officers watching from nearby, stood transfixed as the most powerful man in the world honored a soldier whose contributions they were only beginning to understand. Olivia returned the salute with crisp precision, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten in the weight of the moment. Around them, the entire visible portion of Fort Sheridan had fallen into complete silence, as if the base itself was holding its breath. "Captain," the president continued after the salute was completed, "your country owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid. The intelligence you gathered and the risks you took have saved countless American lives." The crowd of onlookers began to understand that they were witnessing something historic. This wasn't just a routine presidential visit or a standard military briefing. This was recognition of heroism at the highest level, acknowledgement of service that went far beyond the call of duty. Sergeant Reynolds, who had spent the morning questioning Olivia's credentials, felt a flush of embarrassment and awe. He had seen many soldiers come and go through his checkpoint over the years, but he had never seen the President of the United States personally salute anyone below flag rank. Corporal Martinez, who had insisted on searching Olivia's equipment, realized she had been in the presence of someone whose courage and competence were being acknowledged by the highest authority in the land. The lesson was clear and humbling. Heroism didn't always come with advance notice or perfect uniforms. Following the presidential salute, the dynamic at Fort Sheridan shifted completely. What had begun as a story about bureaucratic obstacles became a lesson about the nature of true service and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. Colonel Mitchell personally escorted both the president and Captain Cruz to the secure briefing facility, while the checkpoint guards and assembled personnel processed what they had witnessed. The brief moment of recognition had revealed layers of complexity that challenged everyone's assumptions about military service, gender roles, and the nature of heroism. Inside the briefing room, Olivia presented her intelligence to a small group of the nation's most senior military and civilian leaders. The details she provided, gathered through months of dangerous undercover work, revealed the full scope of the terrorist network that had been dismantled based on her earlier reports. The operation you initiated based on my preliminary intelligence was successful, she reported to the assembled group, but the additional information I gathered during extraction reveals secondary cells that remain active. We have a narrow window to act before they adapt their methods. General Patricia Walsh, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, studied the intelligence package with growing appreciation for its depth and accuracy. Captain, this level of detail could only have been gathered by someone with extraordinary access to the target network. How did you manage to gain this level of trust? Olivia's response revealed the true complexity of her achievement. Ma'am, it required becoming someone they could believe in. I spent 6 months establishing a cover identity, learning their language and customs, proving my commitment to their cause while secretly documenting their activities. The psychological demands were as challenging as the physical risks. President Harrison asked the questions that revealed the full scope of her sacrifice. Captain, what did this mission cost you personally? The question opened a window into aspects of service that rarely appeared in official reports. Olivia had sacrificed relationships, missed family milestones, and lived with the constant stress of maintaining a false identity among people who would have killed her instantly if they discovered the truth. Sir, the mission required me to become someone else for 6 months, maintaining the deception while gathering intelligence and preparing for extraction. It changes you in ways that are difficult to explain. But the alternative, allowing this attack to succeed, was unacceptable. The briefing continued for 2 hours, with Olivia providing detailed answers to questions that would shape national security policy for years to come. But beyond the intelligence value of her information, her presence in that room represented something larger: the evolution of American military capability and the changing face of heroism. When the formal briefing concluded, President Harrison requested a private moment with Captain Cruz. As the other officials filed out, he spoke to her with the informal directness of one service member to another. Olivia, may I call you Olivia? What you accomplish goes beyond outstanding military service. You've demonstrated that courage and competence have nothing to do with gender, background, or conventional expectations. You've probably saved thousands of lives, and you've done it in a way that will change how our military thinks about special operations. His words carried weight beyond their immediate meaning. For Olivia, who had spent her entire career proving herself in environments that didn't always welcome her, this recognition from the highest level represented validation not just of her specific achievements, but of her right to serve in any capacity her abilities merited. Mr. President, she replied, I've been fortunate to serve alongside extraordinary people who judged me by my actions rather than their preconceptions. Today, at your checkpoint, I experienced both sides of that equation. The guards were doing their job, but they were also demonstrating how easily we can miss what's important when we rely on surface judgments. President Harrison nodded thoughtfully. That's a lesson we all need to remember. Excellence comes in many forms, and we can't afford to overlook it because it doesn't match our expectations. As President Harrison prepared to leave Fort Sheridan, he made an unprecedented decision. Rather than departing through the secure entrance, he chose to walk back through the main checkpoint where Olivia's day had begun. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was a teaching moment for everyone who had witnessed the morning's events. The crowd that had gathered earlier remained, now augmented by personnel who had heard about the extraordinary circumstances. When the president emerged from the secure facility with Captain Cruz at his side, walking as equals toward the checkpoint, the assembled soldiers saw a different picture than they had witnessed that morning. President Harrison stopped at the guardhouse where Sergeant Reynolds and Corporal Martinez stood at rigid attention, clearly uncomfortable about their earlier treatment of someone who had just been personally honored by the commander-in-chief. Sergeant Reynolds, Corporal Martinez, the president addressed them directly. "You're doing your jobs this morning, following proper security protocols. Captain Cruz understands that, and so do I. But I want everyone here to remember what we've learned today." He turned to address the broader crowd that had gathered. This officer exemplifies the best of American military service. Her achievements aren't diminished by the fact that she doesn't fit conventional expectations. In fact, her ability to succeed in unconventional circumstances is exactly what made her so effective at protecting our nation. The president's words carried beyond the immediate audience. Video of his salute to Captain Cruz was already circulating through military networks, and the story was beginning to spread through news channels. But for the people present at Fort Sheridan, the lesson was immediate and personal. Sergeant Reynolds approached Captain Cruz as the president's convoy prepared to depart. His weathered face showed the complexity of his emotions, embarrassment at his earlier skepticism, but also genuine respect for what he now understood about her service. "Captain," he said, extending his hand, "I owe you an apology. I let my assumptions override my judgment, and that's not the soldier I want to be." Olivia accepted his handshake with grace. "Sergeant, you were protecting this base and following your training. That's exactly what you should have been doing. But maybe we can all remember that sometimes the most important people don't announce themselves with advance notice." Colonel Mitchell, who had watched the entire day unfold, saw an opportunity to address the broader implications of what had occurred. She called together the personnel who had witnessed the events, creating an informal gathering that became an impromptu leadership lesson. "Today we've seen something remarkable," she began, "but it's remarkable for the wrong reasons. Captain Cruz's achievements should be celebrated, but they shouldn't be surprising. We need to examine why we were so quick to doubt her credentials and so slow to recognize her competence." The discussion that followed was unprecedented in military settings, an open examination of bias, assumption, and the ways that institutional culture could either support or undermine excellence. Junior officers spoke about their own experiences with being underestimated, while senior leaders acknowledged the ways that unconscious bias could affect decision-making. Corporal Martinez, the newest member of the checkpoint team, offered a perspective that resonated with many of the younger personnel present. "I think I was trying so hard to prove I belonged here that I was quick to question whether someone else belonged. That's not the soldier I want to be, and it's not the military I want to serve in." As the day concluded, Captain Cruz found herself in a position she had never sought but felt ready to embrace. Her achievements had made her a symbol of excellence transcending traditional boundaries, but more importantly, they had created an opportunity for the military to examine and improve its own culture. The intelligence she had provided would prevent future terrorist attacks and save countless lives. The briefings she had conducted would influence national security policy for years to come. But perhaps her most lasting contribution would be the example she had set, demonstrating that heroism came in many forms, and that the military's strength lay in recognizing and nurturing excellence wherever it appeared. In the weeks that followed, Captain Olivia Cruz would receive formal recognition for her achievements, including decorations that acknowledged her extraordinary service. But she would always remember the day at Fort Sheridan as the moment when the highest levels of American leadership acknowledged not just her specific accomplishments, but the broader principle that service and sacrifice deserved recognition regardless of who provided them. The guards at the checkpoint would never again assume that heroism announced itself with perfect uniforms or conventional expectations. The personnel who witnessed the president's salute would carry the memory of that moment throughout their careers, remembering the day when assumptions were challenged and excellence was revealed in unexpected forms. And in military academies and training facilities across the country, the story of Captain Olivia Cruz would become part of the curriculum, not just as an example of tactical excellence or operational success, but as a reminder that the true strength of the American military lay in its ability to recognize, develop, and honor the potential that existed in all its people. 3 months after the events at Fort Sheridan, the impact of that singular moment continued to reverberate through the military and beyond. The video of President Harrison's salute to Captain Cruz had become one of the most shared military moments in social media history, but its influence extended far beyond viral fame. At the Pentagon, General Patricia Walsh convened a special committee to examine recruitment and recognition protocols across all branches of the armed forces. The Fort Sheridan incident, as it had become known in military circles, had highlighted systemic issues that leadership could no longer ignore. "We nearly missed one of our most valuable assets because of checkpoint prejudice," General Walsh explained to the committee. If Captain Cruz had been carrying time-sensitive intelligence about an imminent attack, those extra hours of delay could have cost American lives. "We need to examine every process that could create similar blind spots." The committee's work led to comprehensive changes in security protocols, diversity training, and leadership development programs. But perhaps more importantly, it sparked conversations in mess halls, barracks, and officer clubs across the globe. Conversations about what it meant to serve, who deserve recognition, and how the military could better identify and nurture excellence regardless of its packaging. At Fort Sheridan itself, the checkpoint had become an unlikely pilgrimage site for military personnel. Sergeant Reynolds and Corporal Martinez found themselves frequently approached by visitors who wanted to hear their firsthand account of that morning. Initially uncomfortable with the attention, they had gradually come to understand their role in a larger story about growth and learning. The hardest part, Reynolds confided to his wife one evening, wasn't admitting I was wrong about Captain Cruz. It was realizing how many other times I might have been wrong without ever knowing it. How many other people did I underestimate because they didn't fit my picture of what a soldier should look like? Martinez had channeled her experience into action, volunteering to lead diversity and inclusion workshops for new security personnel. Her sessions always began with the same question: how do you recognize excellence when it doesn't announce itself? Captain Cruz herself had returned to active duty with a new assignment that reflected both her operational skills and her unexpected role as a symbol of military evolution. While the details of her work remained classified, those who worked with her noticed a new confidence in her bearing, not arrogance, but the quiet assurance of someone whose worth had been acknowledged at the highest levels. She still faced challenges and occasional prejudice, but the presidential salute had created a protective aura around her reputation. More importantly, it had opened doors for other women in special operations, creating pathways that hadn't existed before her breakthrough. During a rare public appearance at a military academy graduation, Cruz was asked by a young female cadet about advice for overcoming skepticism and prejudice in military service. "Don't let other people's limitations become your limitations," she replied. "When someone doubts your abilities, that says more about their vision than your potential. Focus on being so undeniably competent that doubt becomes irrelevant." But she also acknowledged the systemic changes still needed. "Individual excellence isn't enough," she continued. "We need institutions that actively look for and develop talent wherever it exists. That means changing not just attitudes, but processes, protocols, and assumptions that might be filtering out our best people before they even get a chance to prove themselves." The intelligence Cruz had provided continued to yield results months after her debriefing. The terrorist network she had infiltrated was systematically dismantled through coordinated international operations, preventing multiple planned attacks across 3 continents. Each successful intervention represented lives saved and families protected, though the public would never know how close they had come to tragedy. President Harrison referenced the Fort Sheridan incident in a major policy speech about military modernization and inclusion 6 months later. Without naming Cruz specifically, he spoke about the importance of recognizing that America's military strength came from its diversity of thought, background, and experience. "Our greatest asset isn't our technology or our resources," he told the assembled crowd of military leaders and defense contractors. "It's our ability to identify, develop, and deploy human excellence in all its forms. When we let prejudice or assumption limit that ability, we limit our own effectiveness and security." The speech led to legislative changes in military policy, increased funding for diversity initiatives, and new requirements for bias training at all levels of command. But perhaps more significantly, It established a new narrative about military service, one that emphasized competence over conformity and results over appearances. Back at Fort Sheridan, Colonel Mitchell had been promoted to full colonel and given responsibility for implementing the new diversity and recognition protocols across multiple installations. Her office wall now featured a photograph from the day of the presidential visit, not the formal shots taken during the briefing, but a candid image of President Harrison saluting Captain Cruz while the assembled personnel watched in stunned silence. "That picture reminds me every day," she explained to visiting officers, "that leadership isn't about maintaining the status quo. It's about recognizing excellence wherever it appears and having the courage to acknowledge when our assumptions need to change." The Fort Sheridan checkpoint itself had been redesigned, with new protocols that emphasize verification over assumption, process over prejudice. A small plaque near the guardhouse read, "Excellence serves in many forms. Our duty is to recognize and honor it." Young soldiers assigned to checkpoint duty were required to study the Cruz incident as part of their training, learning not just the security procedures, but the human dynamics that could either support or undermine military effectiveness. The case study had become a standard part of military leadership curriculum, taught alongside classic examples of tactical brilliance and strategic thinking. The story of Captain Olivia Cruz had evolved from a single moment of recognition into a catalyst for institutional change. The presidential salute that had begun as acknowledgement of individual heroism had become a symbol of military evolution, proof that America's armed forces could adapt, grow, and improve while maintaining their core values of honor, courage, and commitment. As winter settled over Fort Sheridan, the base continued its essential work of protecting national security. But something fundamental had changed in the months since that autumn morning. The conversations in corridors and conference rooms now included voices that might have been overlooked before. The assumptions that had once gone unquestioned were now examined and challenged. The definition of what a hero looked like had expanded to include possibilities that hadn't been considered before. The morning had begun with doubt and ended with recognition. But the real victory wasn't in overcoming skepticism. It was in demonstrating that courage, competence, and commitment were not limited by gender, background, or anyone's preconceived notions about what a hero should look like. As the sun set over Fort Sheridan, the base settled back into its routine operations. But something fundamental had changed. A conversation had begun about excellence, recognition, and the true meaning of military service. A conversation that would continue long after Captain Olivia Cruz had returned to the classified world, where she served her country with quiet distinction and unwavering dedication. The ripples of that single moment of recognition continued to spread, touching lives and changing perspectives in ways that would strengthen America's military for generations to come. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't in the intelligence gathered or the attacks prevented, but in the barriers broken and the doors open for all those who would follow in Captain Olivia Cruz's footsteps. Do you believe recognition can change lives? Let us know in the comments what part of this story touched you the most. And if you want more stories of transformation, justice, and quiet strength, make sure to subscribe. Here on this channel, we tell stories like this, real, powerful, and deeply human. If you want to hear more, tap the bell and come with us.